Thanks everybody for joining. It's great to be here. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot in my role is around this concept of managed services. And so we'd had a few people ask us to just do a webinar on kind of the overall concept of managed services and when it might be a great idea for a business and when it might not. So to that end, you'll see on the screen our agenda for today. The first concept is just what is managed services. Like a lot of things in the technology industry, I think people have different definitions. So we thought we'd spend a little bit of time there about what it is and what the services are. We'll talk a little bit about whether it could be right for your business, and the corollary to that is, when is it maybe not a good option for your business, and that's important to know. And then we'll kind of finish the webinar with how do you select a great partner and how do you get the most out of that relationship and your investment you've made. As Stephanie mentioned, if you've got questions at all through this, please feel free to type your questions into the side and I'll pick them up as we go. And then of course we'll have some time at the end if you've got some follow-up questions. So first, let's start with what is managed services. So there's kind of a formal definition on the screen, but really I just want to point out kind of two things here. So the first part is, if you look on the second line, you'll see this idea of a third party. So managed services are provided by an organization outside of your own organization. And as you'll see as we go through today, part of the reason that is important is because it allows for a lot of efficiencies. It's one of the things that enables MSPs to drop down cost and to kind of mitigate some of the business risks that an internal team might present. But maybe the most important part of managed services is right there in the first line in bold, and it's this idea of proactive management. By far the most important thing with IT is to get yourself out of a reactive mode of just supporting things that break or problems that users have, and to get ahead of those problems with proactive services. And that's really the reason that managed services was invented, was to get ahead of some of those things. So one of the questions we had, and I think it'd be great for me as a presenter to be able to understand, is what are some of the day-to-day IT frustrations that you have? I know this varies widely from business to business and from person to person. So if you wouldn't mind taking just a couple of moments and maybe typing into your chat window there, what are some of the biggest challenges you might have, either today or just things you've seen in the past? Okay, I'll kind of keep going, and as you get those into that chat window there, I'll try to address them. But while we're waiting on that, let me talk about when we define managed services, probably one of the key things to think about is what is the value you're going to get out of it. So from my perspective, I really see 5 things that come out of a managed services relationship. So the primary one relates to this idea of proactivity, and it's the stability and the reliability of an IT environment. So through the actions that an MSP provides, they basically get ahead of any problems. They make sure servers are patched, they make sure things are stable, and they make sure as much as possible you see almost no problems with your IT infrastructure, from the user experience all the way down to the back-end systems. The second is this idea of security, and you might not directly relate security and managed services together. But if you think about it, the more you take care of your systems, the more you make sure they're up to date, the harder it is for people to get in. Third is decreased IT costs. We'll show some slides in a moment, but it can be a significant cost savings. An improved end user experience. We just find that people have a great experience when a great MSP is taking care of them. And then finally, this idea of being able to focus your team on strategic initiatives. I talk to IT directors, CIOs, and right along the spectrum of business leaders. And one of the things they want their team to do is focus less on the reaction and more on moving their business forward and helping them grow and being more strategic in what they do with technology. And this can be a great way to free up your team to do that. Some of the services that are provided, and I should mention it can be a mix of these with different things. And you'll see when we get to how to select a provider that it's important you know which components of these are important for you, so you get what you want, and also so you don't overpay for those things that you don't. But things like IT help desk support, that proactive infrastructure monitoring and maintenance. One really important part that we find is this idea of vendor management. So whether it's your internet provider or an application vendor, having someone who speaks the technology speak and can hold those people accountable in the right ways can be a big advantage. IT strategy can be a component of this. So in some cases, getting a bit of CIO on demand to help kind of align with your business and move forward can be great. There's IT governance and documentation. And then a couple of things that I think are really important to get out of your MSP are this idea of transparency into the things that are going on through a dashboard and notification system, and regular updates so that you know things are being taken care of well. So with that leads me to the last bit about defining MSP, and this is the different flavors out there, and maybe some of you will have seen some of these different options, but I'll just go through them real quickly. So on bare bones, the whole idea here is to minimize cost, and that might come at the expense of value, but the idea is to just focus in on the bare minimum scope and therefore get the lowest cost possible. There's the standard MSP, which is kind of the blend of supporting your users and the proactive monitoring and maintenance. You can add security on top of that, both the mindset and tools and training. And then you can add a platform on top of that well in the upper right-hand corner. And this is the idea that they could host your applications. They could be your data center, for example, as well as your service provider. And then I think the highest level is this idea of a strategic MSP. And this is where they act kind of in parallel with you as an IT director or a CIO, or for some businesses, they can kind of fulfill that role as a CIO on demand and get to know your business at a personal level and provide technology advice and strategy to help you make the most of it for what you're trying to do with your business. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful to just kind of level set on what managed services is and some of the different flavors. So, of course, the next question is it right for you and your business? On the left-hand side, these are some of the most common things that I see when managed services might be a good option. So, of course, if technology just continues to be a challenge, so things I hear are, our email was out all day, or it was out for the third time this month, or it seems like things are always breaking and I can't get support when I need it. That is usually an indication that managed services could help. Another idea is this idea to reduce business risk. So we talked about security and how that can improve things. And of course, getting more timely and better support can keep your business moving more quickly. But one of the kind of unseen risks with IT is, a lot of businesses have just one or two people internally that support IT. And as complex as technology is, it's really hard for those people to keep up with everything in technology that's going on. But I'll take Indianapolis as one example. I mean, unemployment in IT is around 2% here, and so flight risk is a definite business risk. And when you've only got one or two folks, business continuity can be a big deal there. So of course, an MSP can help mitigate that. High IT costs are another example. Security or compliance requirements. So certainly in industries like healthcare or the financial industry, there are very strict compliance requirements, many of which flow down to technology and the way it's supported and the processes around it. And that can be a help. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes you just need to free up your team to focus on the strategic initiatives and kind of get them away from the reactive IT support. And it can be a great way to do it. The corollary to that is, of course, there are times when managed services isn't the right approach. And we talk to these organizations as well. If your IT team is doing a fantastic job across all areas and you don't detect business risk, and you're pretty certain that they're doing it at the right cost, well, then I'd say leave well enough alone. If you've got a great team, I don't know that you need to think about going and getting managed services. You can always use it as a way to, kind of benchmark what you've got. But sometimes it's just good to keep a great team in place. There are also certain circumstances where you have extremely specialized needs. So one example of this is, perhaps you built an application or a particular network where it is extremely specialized and it would be really hard for another organization to understand it and support it well. And it's not that you couldn't get that organization up to speed over some period of time, but it might just end up being cheaper, at least for that portion, to have someone internal that knows your business really well, that focuses on that specialization. And then finally, this is one I run into frequently, and one that we've kind of helped customers through from time to time, is this idea that you could be positioned to overpay. If you look at that left-hand side, some of those things might require some mitigation. You might need to get your technology in a more stable place. You might need to take 3 months, 6 months, or what have you to get things kind of under control so that when you're ready to sign up with an MSP, they don't have to build a bunch of risk or a bunch of kind of unique technology into their plan, which of course would translate into just higher costs for you. So it's good to maybe at least take some time to get things under control before you consider that or include it as part of the roadmap. So another great example is this idea of cost savings, and I went through this relatively quickly on the previous page, but over the 150 clients that I've had experience with in this area that Stephanie mentioned, I think the minimum I typically see on cost savings is 20%. I've seen many customers actually as high as 50%. And that doesn't even take into consideration some of these hidden cost considerations. So, how do you put a value on the productivity to your users when they have to wait for things like email to be down, or support doesn't come as quickly as maybe they might hope? How do you put numbers around this idea of mobile worker productivity? I mean, I know myself, I work kind of everywhere all at once, all over the city and in the evenings, and sometimes as I'm sitting on the beach with my kids. It's just little things about mobility and access to information that can help your business move forward a lot faster. And a question I get quite often is how is that possible, right? It seems too good to be true. It basically comes down to these ideas in the blue box. I mean, MSPs, it is what they do day in, day out. They've got efficiency, they've got process, they've got documentation. They can share resources across multiple organizations and kind of move people towards where the need is. So you don't get a lot of wasted effort. And even some of the best internal IT folks will admit, there's just some time during every week where you're probably not as efficient as you would be, or you don't have stuff to do, or you're not quite sure what your priorities are. Some of the elimination of the most common IT issues, and I'm sure people are unfortunately familiar with these, but outage, long support and wait times, unpatched or out-of-date servers, which turn into a security risk. Security breaches is a place where we quite often get engaged. Things like phishing attacks or malware or crypto locker, those things impacting your business are quite often an indicator that there's something underlying there in their technology footprint that needs to be improved. Back to this renewed focus on strategic initiatives. So KSMC has a number of service offerings across our 5 divisions. And one of the things that we've found is incredibly important is with any organization, you have to have the time to focus on strategy and to align where the business is trying to go with all the various data analytics and technology and cybersecurity offerings that are out there. And just talking to IT directors and CIOs, it is sometimes incredibly hard for them to get that. And so MSPs can kind of free up that time for them to get back to those activities. Whether it's technology architecture and implementations or helping the business grow in the ways that you want it to, can just be a really important way to free their time that's sometimes hard to put an exact dollar number on. And then finally, improved cybersecurity posture. I love the second to left sentence on the left. Cyber criminals are lazy. It is absolutely true. What they do is they look for the low-hanging fruit. And if your business has the right patching on your servers and your wireless has the right encryption protocols on it, and you've been doing good password policies and enforcing those through your technology, the fact is they're going to move on to somebody else because it is much easier to get into the organizations that haven't taken care of all those things. And so while you can never eliminate all cybersecurity threats, certainly doing some of the things that an MSP does greatly reduces that risk. And if you add cybersecurity on top of the kind of standard MSP package, you can educate your workforce on phishing attacks, you can make sure your backup and disaster recovery systems are appropriate, and even add on some really great products to protect against viruses and malware and worms and Trojans, things like that, and even insider threats, so people inside your company that may do some things they perhaps should not. Okay, so that kind of gets us through the baseline of what an MSP is and why you might select it or why you might not. Once you've made the decision to select a great MSP, we found some differentiators that are important to consider as you go through the process. And those differentiators basically come down to the three major points on the right-hand side of your screen. So the first is strategy and thought leadership. And you may not always ask your MSP to offer as kind of a scoped service strategy and thought leadership, but they ought to know and be able to converse with you on exactly what technology is doing for businesses, all the new things coming out. Might take Microsoft as one example. They make multiple announcements a year, and these things seem to be moving faster than ever. So they ought to be a resource for you to extend your breadth and your depth across all different kinds of technologies and help you make technology decisions as a company. And if you start asking some questions around that, you'll kind of see if that's the way they think. Do they think about technology as strategic, or do they think about it just as a cost center and they're going to kind of do the bare minimum to keep you going? The second bullet is stability and security of IT environment, which of course we've talked about a lot. Some things to just think about here are they technically excellent? Do they have some of the best people in your region doing this kind of work? Or do they have some of the lowest cost people in this region? Because you'll see a difference in service because of that. Do they have industry specific compliance requirements? Do they understand HIPAA? Do they understand COBIT? Do they understand NIST, et cetera, and know how to manage technology in line with those standards? And then finally, the elimination of day-to-day IT challenges. So I think a great MSP is absolutely fantastic at this. So they're great at doing the proactive maintenance and management, and they ought to be able to speak really clearly about the things they do and why they do them. And then they ought to have a great help desk support, because technology is never perfect. Your users will always have challenges. And so when they call, they don't want to wait hours or days. In the worst case, they want to be responded to right away, and with somebody who's professional and gets through situations quickly and makes your users feel satisfied and supported, and so they can execute the business. So of course there's a lot of other things you can ask, but I'd say those are the three most important. On this slide are some questions on some things that you can ask in each of these areas. So I won't hit all of these. Feel free to read them. And we'll have a guide that provides some additional information in some of these areas as well that you can download. But on strategy and thought leadership, you can ask a really simple open-ended question like, what do you think is the most critical technology drivers for our business growth? And what you'll detect when you answer that question is, do they really understand your business, for one, and do they care about it and what you're trying to do as a business? And then have they deeply thought about what the latest in technology is, what the stable items in technology are, and how they can move you forward. On stability and security of IT, you can ask questions around, one great question is the third one down there, what documentation will I receive? If stability is important and efficiency is important, they ought to have great documentation, and you should be able to have it at any moment, and it should be constantly up to date. And then finally, on IT challenges, the best thing to do is just ask for data there. Just ask them to tell you, what is your average resolution time for tickets? What's your SLA compliance? Do you have customer satisfaction scores, and what are they, and how do they compare to the rest of the industry? There's a few more questions on the next page. Always important, really, with any contract is what it's in scope, and maybe just as important, what's out of scope. So I'd encourage you to ask that. I'll skip down to bullet 4. This is a great question to ask. So how much do your clients spend beyond the base contract? We're pretty passionate here about great IT, and I think, unfortunately, there are some situations that clients can get into where there's a base contract that might look like a great price, or everybody feels pretty good, but then there's change orders and there's add-ons and there's, oh, I'm sorry, that's not covered, and that's a time and material. And if you understand that and you feel like as a business you've got the right balance there, that's great. But it's a good thing to ask, like, how much do your clients typically spend beyond that base contract? Because that will get you to a true cost of what it takes to sign your MSP up, as opposed to just the advertised cost, if you will. And then finally, I think the last question is a great question, and I like it when clients ask me that. What is the exit plan? So, a lot of our clients we've had for 10 years, the entire existence of our organization. But businesses change and organizations change, and at some point you might be dissatisfied, or you might be moving offices and be looking for someone else. So talking about if and when that happens, what do I do? How do I get my data back? How do I get my systems back? What's your offboarding process? And that's another great way to see how dedicated to great client service your MSP is, and to see, to make sure you're not getting yourself into something that would be darn near impossible to get out of, which can be a challenge in the world of IT. So once you've found your perfect partner and you've got somebody who you're excited about working with, typically there's a rollout process and everybody gets excited and there's some communications to the users that's great. One thing I just wanted to kind of finish this presentation with is this idea that you're investing an incredible amount of money into your MSP, as a portion of your overall IT spend. And it's just as important to remember that you also have to invest the time and the effort and the thought into that relationship with your MSP so they can do a great job for your organization. So I've got some items here that can maybe help us there. So I think the 5 things that I think add up to success in the long run, trust and transparency is key, just like with the employees within your business. The more trust and transparency you can build, the better. Alignment on the process, how your business wants to work and how their business wants to work, and making sure those things line up in the right way or things get adjusted if needed. Setting expectations is always a great conversation, both at the front and kind of on an ongoing basis. Communication is key to all of this. And then finally, you just knowing that you have a tool that you can leverage. You have people that have lived and breathed technology, sometimes for decades, and sometimes know it better than anybody else in the city or the region. And you should know that they're a tool that you should reach out to and leverage. So on trust and transparency, just a few tips on how you can do this. So asking questions is probably the best way. Having an open mind about solutions and technology. Technology people, we aren't always known for excellence in communication, but that doesn't mean they don't have great ideas. So kind of listening and finding out what they think are great approaches to technology can be great. Being open about your business challenges is also something that's really good. And that's sometimes hard for business leaders to trust an outside supplier or vendor with information about the hard parts of their business. It's part of why looking for an MSP with strategic thought is so important. But if you can do that, you can get a lot of value out of the relationship. Next is process alignment. I mean, this is reasonably apparent, I think, but every organization operates a little bit differently. And there's the kind of written processes, and then there's the reality on the ground of things like culture and how things actually happen. And sharing as much of that as possible and making sure you have alignment with the way the MSP works is good. And just being honest, your organization will have to change. If they're used to just walking up to someone's desk and suddenly they have to make a phone call or send an email, there could be a little change management that needs to happen there, a little bit of communication, and in certain cases they'll just have to adapt to a new process. If you've chosen the right partner, they'll be ecstatic about it after not too long, but there could be some change that has to happen. On setting expectations, this is really just open and honest communication. It is also, I think, important on the third bullet down. Part of expectations is saying them out loud or writing them down. The other part of expectations is reinforcing those through check-ins. So your MSP should have at least quarterly, maybe monthly meetings with you to talk about how the relationship is going and you're getting the service you desire. Make sure you keep track of those expectations and hold them accountable to those. Some MSPs, you will need some room to adapt sometimes, right? I mentioned every organization maybe needs to go through some change. Quite often an MSP will have to adapt, especially to some of the cultural aspects. And so giving them some time to do that is a benefit. On communication, there are different ways to handle this. One thing that we've found great is to establish a main point of contact, to have some of the strategic conversations and to have the performance conversations with. Just as you expect your help desk team to respond really quickly, the quicker that you can respond to questions your supplier might have, the better. And just making communication as proactive as possible. On leveraging expertise, I mean, I kind of mentioned this in the first bit, but when you go through strategic planning processes, as you're approaching the end of your fiscal year or maybe your quarterly goals, remember that you've got this technology resource out there that you can bring into those conversations to help you. So much of business now, and I think increasingly in small business, so much of it is about leveraging technology to give yourselves an advantage, and bringing the people to the table can really help that. And then I love the last point, ask to talk to the boss. You'll have an account manager or a team lead. You'll have the help desk folks you interact with on an ongoing basis. But there's always a lot more people in the organization. And as a client, you should feel like you should be able to leverage all the expertise that organization has, not just necessarily the people that have been assigned to you. And so don't be afraid to ask for that. So that kind of concludes things. So we spoke through, what is managed services, what are the different components, and what are the options for how they can fit together, when to choose it and when not. And then we talked through how to find a great partner and then how to make that relationship the most successful. I hope this was great for everyone. I appreciate the time to talk to you. I'll turn it over to Stephanie now to wrap things up.
Thanks, Mark. Great job. As I mentioned earlier, you do have a box you should be able to see on the left-hand side of your screen, so please enter in some questions and Mark will be happy to answer those. As those questions are coming in, a common one that we get a lot that we thought we should address is, what should you expect after you sign a managed services contract? What's the next step?
Sure. So managed services would refer to that as onboarding. And so there's a few things that I think you should expect as you go through the onboarding process. So one way to think about it is onboarding is more than just the technical aspects. There's both people, process, and technology that need to become part of the onboarding process. So you can expect great communications, you can expect kind of a rollout to your organization and integration into the process. And then you can expect, that the systems get set up. There'll be really practical things like, they'll probably have a monitoring software, a remote support software that'll get rolled out, and people will see, a new little icon pop up on their computer. They'll want to do documentation, so there should be really great documentation after probably the first month, maybe 2, of signing up with your partner. And I would say, at least by the end of the second month, you should be fully onboarded and ready to go, and everything should be running pretty smoothly.